They're not here to introduce you, so
Yeah.
you can go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Kwek. I'm a third year here at Eastern Michigan University. I'm studying urban and regional planning. My faculty advisor, RJ Kasilniak, could not be here today, but all thanks to him for helping me with this. Today I'm going to try to talk to you a little bit about car dependency and maybe introduce some ideas on how we can rethink our regional transportation systems. So I'd like to start off by telling you a story about James Robertson. He was dubbed the Walking Man by the Detroit Free Press in 2015 in an article where they detailed his story about him commuting 23 miles from his home in Detroit near Holbrook and Woodward to a GM factory in Rochester Hills, Michigan. When he could, he would take VDOT and smart buses, but usually his shifts would get out late at night, and those bus services would not be available at those times or those places. And so many times he would have to walk up to 7 miles to get where he's needed to go through sleet, rain, snow, and often through areas of Highland Park in Detroit that he often felt unsafe in. The community heard of this through the Detroit Free Press article, and they banded together to create a GoFundMe, which eventually gained enough money for him to buy his own car, and then eventually an apartment closer to where he works. So the default question that society asks when faced with Robertson's situation is, why does this man not have a car? And thus the solution becomes for him to get a car, which they did through the GoFundMe. However, I think we should be asking questions like, why isn't the bus system good enough to make his travel effective or safe or quick? Or why does he even live so far away from where he needs to work? Or why does he not even make enough working full-time in a factory in order to afford the most common form of transportation we have in the United States? It makes sense as a short term to buy this man a car because that's the type of infrastructure systems we have in place. However, I think we should rethink our priorities when it comes to transportation. And I think Roberson's story really exemplifies our transportation system, the inequalities in our transportation systems and our environments, as I think car dependency adversely affects lower income residents way more than it does wealthier residents. So car dependency has a large network of problems that it's both caused by and that it causes. These problems include climate change and health-related issues, both related to air pollution created by automobile transportation. Again, these adversely affect lower-income residents more often because they live in high-risk areas closer to highways or even areas closer to the coast that are more subject to effects of climate change. Car dependency is more discriminatory to people who can't drive, like Robertson, who can't afford a car, or people who are too young or too old or don't have the ability to drive. And I think it causes traffic. Nobody likes traffic. Traffic also causes a lot of economic harm, as the amount of time spent in traffic, could be time, adding to economic incentive. But it also adds to, incentivizes urban sprawl and unsustainable housing practices. The building of highways and large roads incentivizes development that's very far apart. You basically have to drive from your house to work, to places of worship, to recreation. And since places are so far apart, you need a vehicle. And again, if you can't afford a vehicle, it adversely affects you even more. And also these policies destroy the natural and cultural environment. We'll see that later, but obviously more spreading out of development adds to the destruction of trees, natural environment, etc. And also all of these are a form of like social isolation or individualized living standards that basically places even further adversities on people of lower income, I think. So who gets to decide why we drive? So this is a power structure that has been put in place forever ago, although it's still in place today. Corporations like auto companies and oil companies who benefit from auto-based transport because they sell those products, often exchange with policymakers campaign funding in order to get subsidies that subsidize their infrastructure systems, and often even give those companies tax breaks. Those corporations and those policymakers then create those infrastructure systems that we all use, things like the interstate highway system, and also like zoning policies that create that sprawled development where you have to drive from one place to another. Again, we all use these infrastructure systems. Middle class, whether you have enough money to buy a car, although you don't consider yourself wealthy, or if you're lower class and can't afford a car still, or can't, like Robertson, we're all victims of car dependency in one way or another. Developers are also a giant part of the system that creates this infrastructure, as they're the ones that are creating the highways and this land use. One of the only negotiating factors we have our labor unions as middle class and lower class residents have a bargaining chip with, at least in this region, the auto companies and the UAW, as they can use that power to kind of get that political and economical power back from those corporations in the form of increased wages, and therefore can afford their own vehicles. Speaking of power structures, one of the biggest atrocities created by one of these power structures is the destruction of Black Bottom. Black Bottom was a historically black neighborhood in just east of downtown Detroit. It was a thriving community, had lots of local businesses, like thousands of people lived there, thriving community, and it was destroyed in order to put in I-375. That again profited the corporations, policymakers, which implemented this highway. The people were given little to no notice. They were displaced. This further created the cycle of this power imbalance, as those people that lived there had no place to go, and this infrastructure that was built was just to incentivize privatized transportation. And today this highway is underutilized and it's being redeveloped into an at-grade boulevard. Speaking of Detroit, I'd like to compare different cities and geographies when it comes to car dependency. On one side, we have Detroit. It's the motor capital of the world. A big part of our culture is the automobile and the construction of it. It's one of the only cities where you use highways to get from one part of the city to another. It's, again, 6 below grade highways, uniquely lacks a metro system. The only two other cities in the United States that are at our size or bigger that don't have a metro system or a subway system are Dallas and Houston, Texas. It ranks 28th in transit among cities over 250,000 residents. And it has a lot of bus efficiency problems like we've seen with James Robertson, with subhaul alternatives such as the Q line and People Mover. New York, on the other hand, is one of the densest cities in America. It's extremely walkable, one of the best transit systems in the US. However, it has its own transit issues. Its infrastructure and its subways are aging rapidly, and because of the prioritization of automobile travel, it's hard to get that funding and to acquire land uses in order to fix that infrastructure. It also deals with other issues of car dependency like traffic and wealth inequity. Recently, it famously enacted one of the first congestion pricing programs where people who drove in certain parts of Manhattan were basically charged based on scanning of their license plates just for driving, because the amount of wear and tear that automobiles put on the infrastructure that public funds create was disproportionate to those that take public transit. And this just goes to show that each city has its own problems with car dependency, and therefore they should be looked at and solved differently. On one hand, Detroit is a lot less dense. It would not make a lot of sense to put our own metro system in the Detroit area because it's so it lacks that density and it lacks that funding. But we do have all these highways. So a good solution would to just be increase the bus efficiency and make people like James Robertson's commute better. On the other hand, New York has the things like congestion pricing that would help its problems there. So in conclusion, car dependency is deeply rooted in many other issues that both cause and are caused by it. Climate change, wealth inequity, etc. The way our society's power structures are set up is a prime factor in producing car dependency and the inequities that come with it. And I think a large part in solving car dependency is to maybe rethink these power structures in the first place, as it's a core factor in why it exists. And then to solve these issues of car dependency, we have to recognize that each place looks different, whether that's different cities in North America, different cities in the US, different cities throughout the world, or even different landscapes like rural to suburban to inner city landscapes. Anyways, that's it. Thank you so much for listening.